Hey everyone, and welcome back for another deep dive. This time, we're going to be diving into the animal kingdom.
Ooh, exciting.
Yeah, we've got a section of a biology textbook all about classifying animals.
Okay.
And I think we're going to unearth some pretty interesting stuff. So
I think so too.
let's get started.
All right.
So first things first, why do we even need to classify animals? Like, what's the point of all these categories and labels and all that?
Well, imagine a world where we didn't have any way to organize all the millions of animal species out there.
Oh, gosh.
It would be chaos, right?
Yeah.
So classification helps us make sense of that incredible diversity. It lets us understand how different animals are related to each other, and it even gives us clues about how life on Earth has evolved over millions of years.
So it's like putting together a giant puzzle where each animal is a piece, and the classification system helps us see the big picture.
Exactly. It's all about understanding the connections and the patterns in the web of life.
I love that. So how do scientists actually go about classifying all these animals? Like, what features do they look at?
Well, they consider a whole bunch of factors, starting with the very basic level of organization.
Okay.
They also look at things like symmetry, how embryos develop, and even whether an animal has a body cavity or not.
So it's a pretty complex process.
It can be, but it's also incredibly fascinating as we delve deeper into the intricacies of animal life.
Or let's start with levels of organization. Is this about how complex an animal's body is?
Exactly. It's all about how cells are arranged and specialized within an organism.
Okay.
So at the simplest level, we have single-celled organisms like bacteria and protists.
Those are like the most basic building blocks of life.
Exactly. And then as we move up the hierarchy, we get to animals with specialized tissues like muscle tissue or nervous tissue.
Right.
And then even more complex animals have organs like a heart or a stomach. And finally, the most complex animals have organ systems where multiple organs work together to perform a specific function.
Like our digestive system or our circulatory system.
Exactly. So you can see how this hierarchy reflects the evolutionary history of animals with simpler organisms generally appearing earlier on Earth and more complex ones evolving later.
So it's like a step-by-step process of increasing complexity.
Yeah, it's like building a house. You start with the foundation and then gradually add more and more layers until you have a complete structure.
I love that analogy. So we've got these levels of organization, but what about symmetry? I remember learning about that in school, but could you give us a refresher?
Sure. Symmetry refers to how an animal's body is arranged around a central point or axis.
Okay.
There are a couple main types of symmetry.
Yeah.
Some animals, like jellyfish, exhibit radial symmetry, which means their body parts are arranged around a central axis, like spokes on a wheel.
Ah, so you could cut them into equal slices like a pie, and each slice would be pretty much identical.
Exactly. But then many other animals, including us humans, have bilateral symmetry, which means their body can be divided into two mirrored halves along only one plane.
Like if you drew a line down the middle of our body, the left side would be a mirror image of the right side.
Exactly. Bilateral symmetry is associated with more directed movement and the development of a head region with specialized sensory organs.
So it's like radial symmetry is about having multiple mirror lines, while bilateral is just the one.
You got it. And of course, there are some animals that don't fit neatly into either category, like sponges, which are asymmetrical, meaning they lack any defined symmetry.
Interesting. So symmetry plays a key role in classifying animals, but are there any other features that scientists consider?
Absolutely. Let's talk about embryonic development, specifically something called germ layers.
Germ layers, what are those?
These are layers of cells that form early in an animal's development.
Okay.
And they eventually give rise to different tissues and organs.
So they're like the blueprint for how an animal's body is going to be built.
Exactly. Now, some animals, like jellyfish and corals, have two germ layers.
Okay.
An outer layer called the ectoderm, and an inner layer called the endoderm. These animals are called diploblastic.
Diploblastic, got it.
But then you have more complex animals like worms, insects, and vertebrates, which have three germ layers.
Okay.
The ectoderm, the endoderm, and a middle layer called the mesoderm.
And these are called the
Triploblast.
triploblastic,
Right.
okay? So what's the significance of having that extra layer, the mesoderm?
Well, the mesoderm gives rise to a whole bunch of important tissues and organs that aren't found in diploblastic animals.
Like what?
Things like muscles, bones, the circulatory system, and many internal organs.
So it's like having a more advanced set of building blocks allowing for more complex body structures.
Precisely. The development of the mesoderm was a major evolutionary step that allowed for a huge increase in animal diversity and complexity.
That makes sense. So we've talked about levels of organization, symmetry, and germ layers. What's next on our classification checklist?
Let's talk about another important feature, the coelom.
Oh, what?
The coelom.
Wow.
It's a fluid-filled body cavity that's completely lined by tissue derived from the mesoderm.
Okay. So why is this body cavity so important for classification?
Well, it might seem like just empty space, but the coelom actually serves several important functions.
Okay.
It provides space for organs to move and grow. It acts as a cushion to protect them from injury.
Right.
And it can even help with circulation and waste removal.
So it's more than just nothingness. It's actually a pretty important space.
Exactly. Now, not all animals have a coelom.
Really?
Some animals, like flatworms, lack a true coelom altogether, and they're called acoelomates.
Acoelomates, okay.
And then there are pseudocoelomates, like roundworms, which have a body cavity, but it's only partially lined by mesoderm.
Interesting. So there are different types of body cavities.
Yes. And the presence or absence of a coelom and the type of coelom an animal has tells us something about its evolutionary history.
So the coelom is another piece of the puzzle that helps us understand how animals are related to each other.
Absolutely. And speaking of putting pieces together, let's move on to segmentation.
Segmentation, okay.
This is where an animal's body is divided into repeating units or segments.
Like an earthworm.
Exactly. Earthworms are a great example of segmentation. Their bodies are made up of a series of ring-like segments, both internally and externally.
So it's like nature's version of modular design.
That's a great way to put it. Segmentation offers several advantages. It allows for specialization of different body regions.
Like how the head of an earthworm is specialized for sensing and eating.
Exactly. Segmentation also provides flexibility and efficient movement.
And it can even provide a degree of redundancy, right?
Yes. If one segment is damaged, the others can often compensate.
That's pretty clever.
Yeah.
So segmentation is another important feature that scientists use to classify animals.
Absolutely. And it's particularly important in distinguishing different groups of worms, arthropods, and chordates.
Chordates. That's our phylum, right?
It is. Chordates are defined by a few key features, one of which is the notochord.
The notochord, what's that?
It's a flexible, rod-like structure that runs along the back of the animal during embryonic development. It provides support and serves as an anchor for muscles.
So it's like a precursor to a backbone.
Exactly. In many chordates, including us humans, the notochord is eventually replaced by the vertebral column, or backbone.
Wow, so that seemingly insignificant structure in our early development is what connects us to all other chordates, from fish to birds.
It is, and it's just one example of how studying classification reveals the deep connections that unite all life on Earth.
That's incredible. Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground here. We've talked about levels of organization, symmetry, germ layers, chylums, segmentation, and the notochord. Is there anything else we need to know about classification before we start diving into specific animal groups?
Well, one important thing to remember is that classification systems are constantly evolving as scientists make new discoveries and refine their understanding of evolutionary relationships.
Right. So what we learned today might change slightly as we gain more knowledge.
That's the beauty of science. It's always a work in progress.
I love that. Okay. I'm ready to start exploring the diversity of the animal kingdom one phylum at a time. Where should we begin?
Let's start with a group that's often overlooked, but they're truly fascinating. The porifera, or sponges.
Sponges. Aren't those just, well, sponges? What's so interesting about them?
They may seem simple, but trust me, they have some surprising secrets.
All right, I'm intrigued. Let's dive into the world of sponges.
Okay, so sponges, they've been around for a really long time, like over 500 million years.
Wow, that's older than the dinosaurs.
Right. And even though they may look pretty simple, they play a really important role in marine ecosystems.
Okay, how so?
Well, they're filter feeders, which means they constantly draw in water and filter out tiny organisms like bacteria and algae.
So they're kind of like the ocean's cleaning crew.
Exactly. They help to keep the water clean and clear, which is essential for all sorts of other marine life.
That makes sense. But I always thought sponges were more like plants.
Yeah.
You know, they just sit there and don't move.
Yeah, they are sessile, meaning they don't move around, but they're definitely animals.
Okay, how can you tell?
Well, they have specialized cells that work together to perform different functions, even though they don't form true tissues or organs like more complex animals.
Interesting. So what about their body structure? How does that help them be such efficient filter feeders?
Their body is basically a network of channels and chambers that allows water to flow through it.
Okay.
And as the water flows through, those specialized cells I mentioned capture food particles and oxygen.
So it's like their entire body is one giant filter.
You got it. And they have another trick up their sleeve, too.
What's that?
They can reproduce both sexually and asexually.
So they have options. No wonder they've been around for so long.
Exactly. They're adaptable and resilient, which has helped them thrive for millions of years.
Okay, that's pretty cool. So sponges are more complex than they seem. What's next on our list?
Let's move on to the Cynarians. This phylum includes some pretty familiar creatures like jellyfish, corals, and sea anemones.
Ah, now we're talking. Jellyfish are so cool, but also kind of scary with those stinging tentacles.
Yeah, they're definitely not something you want to mess with. They get their name from a unique feature they all share: stinging cells called lenocytes.
Lenocytes, that's a mouthful. What exactly are those?
They're specialized cells that contain a tiny harpoon-like structure that injects toxins into prey or predators.
Oh, wow, so that's how they sting.
Exactly. Those stinging cells are incredibly effective for both capturing prey and defending themselves.
It's like having a built-in weapon system.
Sure.
So besides jellyfish, what other interesting cnidarians are there?
Well, corals are pretty amazing.
Corals, but they just look like rocks.
They might look that way, but they're actually colonies of tiny animals called polyps. Each polyp secretes a hard calcium carbonate skeleton that forms the structure of the coral reef.
So those massive coral reefs are actually built by tiny animals.
Exactly. It's an incredible feat of biological engineering, and coral reefs are super important for marine biodiversity. They provide food and shelter for countless fish, invertebrates, and other creatures.
They're like underwater cities.
That's a great way to put it. Sadly, coral reefs are facing a lot of threats these days from climate change, pollution, and overfishing.
That's really sad. They're such beautiful and important ecosystems.
It is a concern, but hopefully with increased awareness and conservation efforts, we can help protect these amazing underwater worlds.
Yeah, fingers crossed. Okay, what's next on our whirlwind tour of the animal kingdom?
Let's delve into the world of flatworms, or platyhelminthes as they're scientifically known.
Flatworms. The name isn't exactly inspiring, but I'm sure they have some interesting features.
Oh, they definitely do. For starters, they're acellumates, remember?
Acellumates, meaning they don't have a true body cavity.
Exactly. Their bodies are basically solid, with no internal cavity surrounding their organs.
So it's like all their organs are just packed together.
Yeah, pretty much. But they've evolved some clever strategies to overcome the challenges of this body plan.
Like what?
Well, they have a highly branched digestive system that extends throughout their body.
All right.
This allows them to absorb nutrients efficiently despite their lack of a coelom.
So they found a workaround for their lack of space. Pretty ingenious.
Right. And many flatworms are parasites, meaning they live inside other animals and derive their nutrients from their host.
Oh, parasites. That's a bit creepy. Are they harmful?
Some can be, yeah. Tapeworms, for example, can cause a range of health problems in humans by living in their intestines and absorbing nutrients from their food.
Yuck. I definitely don't want to get a tapeworm. Okay, let's move on to a hopefully less creepy group of animals. What about those roundworms we talked about earlier, the Ascomynthes?
Ah, yes. Roundworms are pseudocoelomates, meaning they have a body cavity, but it's not fully lined by mesoderm like a true coelom.
Right. So they're kind of in between flatworms and those more complex animals with true coeloms.
Exactly. And even though their body cavity isn't a true coelom, it still provides some of the same benefits.
Like space for organs and a fluid-filled cushion to protect them.
Exactly. Roundworms are also super diverse. There are free-living species found in pretty much every habitat on Earth.
Wow, really?
Yeah. And there are also parasitic species that can cause diseases in plants and animals.
So they can be both helpful and harmful depending on the species.
That's right. They're a fascinating group of animals with a wide range of ecological roles.
Okay, on to the next group. What about the annelids, or segmented worms? I'm really curious about those guys after our discussion about segmentation earlier.
Annelids are the segmentation champions. Their bodies are divided into a series of repeating segments, both internally and externally.
Right, like earthworms.
Exactly. And this segmentation allows for a lot of flexibility and specialization.
How so?
Well, each segment can have its own set of muscles and nerves, which allows for more precise movement. And different segments can also be specialized for different functions like sensing, feeding, digestion, or reproduction.
So it's like each segment is a mini version of the whole animal.
Kind of. It's a really efficient design that has allowed annelids to thrive in a variety of environments.
So besides earthworms, what other annelids are out there?
Well, there are marine annelids like polychaetes, which have these feathery appendages called parapodia that they use for swimming and crawling.
Cool.
And then there are leeches, which are probably the most infamous annelids.
Leeches, those blood-sucking creatures.
Yeah, some leeches do feed on blood,
Okay.
but not all of them. Some are predators and some are scavengers.
Really?
Yeah, and even those blood-sucking leeches have some interesting uses.
Like what?
Well, they produce an anticoagulant in their saliva that prevents blood from clotting.
Okay.
And this has actually been used medicinally for centuries in improve blood flow and promote healing.
Wow. So even leeches have a helpful side.
Nature's full of surprises.
Mm.
Okay, are you ready for the grand finale?
Bring it on.
Let's talk about the largest and most diverse phylum in the entire animal kingdom. The arthropods.
Arthropods. Now, those are some familiar faces. We're talking insects, spiders, crabs, lobsters, and so many more, right?
You got it. Arthropods are everywhere. They're found in virtually every habitat on Earth, from the deepest oceans to the highest mountains.
That's incredible. But what makes them so successful? Why are there so many different kinds of arthropods?
Well, they have a few key features that have contributed to their evolutionary success.
Like what?
First of all, they have a tough, protective exoskeleton made of chitin.
So it's like a suit of armor.
Exactly. It provides support, protection from predators, and helps prevent water loss.
That's a pretty sweet advantage. What else?
Well, like annelids, they're segmented, but they've taken it to a whole new level.
What do you mean?
They have specialized appendages for different functions. Think about insects. They have legs for walking, wings for flying, antennae for sensing their environment, and mouth parts adapted for their specific diet.
It's like they have a tool for every job.
Exactly. And their jointed appendages, from which they got their name, give them incredible flexibility and a wide range of motion.
So they can crawl, climb,
Yeah.
swim, fly, and even manipulate objects with their specialized appendages.
It's like they have the ultimate toolkit for survival. And we can't forget about their incredible sensory systems.
What about them?
Well, many arthropods have compound eyes that give them a wide field of view and excellent motion detection.
Okay.
They also have sensitive antennae and other sensory organs that allow them to detect chemicals, vibrations, and even changes in air pressure.
Wow. It's like they're super powered. No wonder they're so successful.
Yeah.
Okay, this is amazing. We've covered so many incredible animals already, and I can't wait to see what else is out there.
Well, hold on to your hats because we're about to dive into the fascinating world of mollusks.
Mollusks. All right. I'm ready to learn about snails and clams and all those slippery critters.
They're a pretty diverse bunch, aren't they? From those slow-moving snails to the lightning-fast squid, there's a lot to unpack here.
Okay, so let's start with the basics. What makes a mollusk a mollusk?
Well, most mollusks have a soft, unsegmented body,
Okay.
and they're often covered by a hard protective shell made of calcium carbonate.
Like a snail shell.
Exactly. And then there's this unique structure called the mantle.
The mantle.
Yeah, it's a fold of tissue that secretes the shell and encloses a space called the mantle cavity.
So the mantle is like a built-in shell factory. Pretty neat.
It is. And the mantle cavity houses the gills, which are used for respiration as well as other organs.
So it's a multi-purpose space.
Exactly. And then mollusks also have a muscular foot, which they use for locomotion.
Like a snail's foot that it slides along on.
Yeah. And then there's this rasping tongue-like structure called a radula that they use for feeding.
A rasping tongue. That sounds kind of creepy. What do they use it for?
Well, it depends on the mollusk. Some use it to scrape algae off rocks. Others use it to drill into shells to get to the soft tissue inside.
So they've got a shell-making mantle, a multi-purpose mantle cavity, a muscular foot, and a rasping tongue. Mollusks are full of surprises.
They are. And we haven't even gotten to the cephalopods yet.
Cephalopods. Those are the squid and octopuses, right?
You got it. They're a fascinating group of mollusks that have evolved some incredible adaptations.
Like their intelligence. I've always been amazed by how smart octopuses are.
They really are remarkable creatures. They can solve puzzles, use tools, and even recognize individual humans.
And their color-changing abilities are incredible. It's like they have a built-in invisibility cloak.
Right. They have specialized pigment cells called chromatophores that allow them to change color and texture in an instant.
Okay, so we've got these incredible cephalopods, but what about the more traditional mollusks? What else can you tell me about snails and clams?
Well, snails are pretty interesting because they've adapted to life on land, in fresh water, and in the ocean.
So they're pretty versatile.
They are. And clams are filter feeders, just like sponges. They burrow into the sand or mud and filter out food particles from the water.
So they're playing a similar role in their ecosystems as sponges do.
Exactly. They're all part of this interconnected web of life.
Okay, I think I'm starting to get a handle on mollusks. What's next on our list of fascinating creatures?
Let's move on to the Echinodermata. This phylum includes starfish, sea urchins, sand dollars, and sea cucumbers.
Starfish, I love those. Their ability to regenerate lost limbs is incredible.
It is pretty amazing. They can even regrow their entire body from a single arm, as long as a portion of the central disc is attached.
It's like a superpower. What other cool features do echinoderms have?
Oh, they have a unique water vascular system. It's a network of fluid-filled canals that extends throughout their body.
Okay.
And it's involved in locomotion, feeding, and even respiration.
Wait, so their water vascular system helps them move, eat, and breathe. That's amazing. How does it work?
They have these tiny tube feet that are controlled by water pressure.
Tube feet.
Yeah. They stick out from the body, and the echinoderm can use them to grip surfaces, move along the seafloor, and even capture prey.
Wow, that's incredible. There's like a built-in hydraulic system.
It is.
Sponges, scinidarians, flatworms, roundworms, annelids, arthropods, mollusks, and echinoderms. Is there anything else we need to talk about?
We have one more phylum to cover, the Hemichordata.
Hemichordata, that's a new one. What kind of animals are those?
They're a small group of marine animals that share some characteristics with both echinoderms and chordates.
So they're kind of a bridge between two major branches of the animal kingdom.
Exactly. And they're really interesting because they give us clues about how chordates, our phylum, might have evolved.
Okay, what kind of clues are we talking about?
Well, hemichordates have a structure called a stomachoid, which is a flexible, rod-like structure that runs along their back.
Okay.
It's similar to the notochord that we talked about earlier, which is a defining characteristic of chordate.
Right, the notochord is like the precursor to a backbone.
Exactly. So the stomachoid in hemichordates suggests that our notochord might have evolved from a similar structure in our ancestors.
That's fascinating.
Yeah.
So these hemichordates, even though they're a small and often overlooked group, are really important for understanding the evolution of our own phylum.
Absolutely. They're a living testament to the interconnectedness of life and the power of evolution to shape amazing diversity.
Wow, what an incredible journey this has been. We've explored the amazing diversity of the animal kingdom from the simplest sponges to the most complex vertebrates.
It's been a whirlwind tour, hasn't it?
It has. And I've learned so much about how scientists classify animals and the incredible adaptations that allow them to thrive in all sorts of environments.
It's a testament to the power of evolution to shape life in fascinating and unexpected ways.
So what are some of the key takeaways from our deep dive into animal classification? What should our listeners remember about this fascinating subject?
Well, I think the biggest takeaway is that classification isn't just about putting animals into neat little boxes. It's about understanding the evolutionary relationships between them and appreciating the incredible diversity of life on Earth.
And recognizing that even the smallest and seemingly insignificant creatures can play a vital role in their ecosystems.
Exactly. We're all connected in this web of life, and understanding how animals are classified helps us appreciate the interconnectedness of all living things.
Well said. Thanks for joining me on this deep dive into the animal kingdoms.
It's been a pleasure.
And to all our listeners out there, keep exploring, keep learning, and keep marveling at the wonders of the natural world. We'll be back soon with another deep dive into a fascinating topic, so stay tuned.